potential for hundreds of thousands. The square itself can hold about 250,000 people, in addition to the thousands that will likely pour onto the surrounding streets. This seems pretty in line with the last two conclaves. When you look at 2013, the white smoke appeared at 7:06 p.m. In 2005, the white smoke at 5:50 p.m. We're talking about the fifth ballad when it was Pope Francis, the fourth ballad when it was Pope Benedict. And here we are. We talked about this, the likelihood that it would happen, the average 3.3 days, as that cardinal had said to James several days ago, that something unusual will have happened if we do not have a new pope by Friday. Here we are on Thursday with that announcement imminent. If the past is any indication, it likely may be 40 minutes or so before we hear Habemus Papam, we have a new pope.
The two words we will wait to hear, of course, from the balcony here in St. Peter's Square. You can see it in the faces of the faithful who have gathered here. And we've taken note, you know, Lindsay, you've been down there, I've been down there as well, talking to so many of the people who have gathered here to witness this particular moment, though they were happy even when they saw the signal of black smoke, because they knew they were part of history. And so many of the people I talked with, both Catholic and non-Catholics, said they were drawn to the Vatican. And many of them told me, those who were not Catholic, said they were drawn here because of Pope Francis and his ability to reach out beyond the Catholic Church, the human touch, reaching out to every corner of the globe. And the question is, and there are many, but one of them is whether or not within the Sistine Chapel they decided to go in the same direction, a similar direction, at least when it comes to reaching out to the peripheries, the people who are unheard, unseen in every corner of the world, that'll be part of the patchwork that is put together by this next cardinal who will soon be introduced not only here at the Vatican, but to the world as the next Pope of the Catholic Church. Father James Martin has been with us every step of the way. Father Martin, what an extraordinary thing to witness.
Honestly, it's amazing to be here. You see these in history books, you see it on YouTube from way back when, and to hear the bells and to see the smoke pouring out is exciting. Also for me, it's incredible to think that one of those men who was a cardinal just eating lunch with them, right, a few hours ago, is now the successor of St. Peter, the victor of Christ, the spiritual head of 1.4 billion Catholics. So the transformation from cardinal to pope is quite amazing.
Father Martin here with us, and he will be here as we await the announcement, the presentation to the world. When they announce that they do have a pope at that balcony, we were talking a moment ago about what plays out now inside the Sistine Chapel. The cardinal who has been elected, and it's so extraordinary to think that they were just having lunch. You know, they voted this morning. Their first vote was yesterday afternoon here at the Vatican. They took a break, obviously, for dinner, and then were sequestered all evening. They had time to think about the numbers that they witnessed during that first vote. They returned for Mass this morning and then voted again. We saw the black smoke here this morning. They took a break for lunch, and then they returned after lunch. And as Lindsay was pointing out, this would mean this is either the fourth or fifth ballot. The Church has not told us which one it was, though we believe it's the fourth ballot. And if that's the case, it is right in line with the announcement of Pope Benedict. It was then the fifth ballot for Pope Francis. Some say the sixth ballot because there were two ballots that actually stuck to one another. They had to redo it. But generally, the same time frame that we witnessed with Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. Let's get right back down to St. Peter's Square. Maggie Rulli among the people there. And Maggie, we see the tears on the faces, people holding up their phones, some just staring, and I believe just taking in the moment, looking up at the bells ringing for the new Pope. And not only that, but to see that white smoke emerge from the chimney.
David, it is simply incredible. There's almost not words to describe it. The emotions are overwhelming. You mentioned those tears. So many people, when we saw that white smoke, first there was applause, and then they were overcome by emotion, breaking down in tears, smiling. We've seen people immediately hopping on the phone to call family and friends, telling them that there's white smoke. We have a pope. And all of a sudden, David, as I'm looking out around me, you just feel this crush of humanity. We see constantly people streaming into the square. As Lindsay said, we're expecting at least 250,000 people here reaching capacity, even more in the surrounding streets. And let me tell you, guys, they are in the square with me right now. We are shoulder to shoulder with the faithful, with even non-Catholics that are just here to witness history. I'm overhearing people just with smiles on their faces, and it's infectious right now. You cannot help but feel the energy and feel the hope, as now we're all waiting to see who is the next pope.
We wait right here with you, Maggie, and with the faithful who've gathered in the square. Again, tens of thousands. There were 45,000 people who gathered here for the first evening. And as history would tell us, there is, with the exception of one time, never a pope on that first vote. And yet they came anyway. And so many of them told me they were drawn here. They knew they would see the black smoke, but that they wanted to witness a piece of history. Look at the blue sky, the backdrop of the Vatican here, of St. Peter's Basilica. We know that inside the Sistine Chapel, at the conclusion of the election, there's typically a round of applause from the fellow cardinals. And can you imagine the moment when one of the cardinals inside that room recognizes that he will become the next pope, that he is the top sort of vote getter or earner of the number that must be reached. And we know that's a 2/3 majority. So in this case, you had 133 cardinals in that room. That means you'd need to meet the 89 vote threshold. And going into this conclave, we knew that these were cardinals from all over the world. Pope Francis had selected about 80% of them. Of course, that was no guarantee that whoever this next pope is will follow the mold of Pope Francis. What it does guarantee, though, is a more representative vote, because it did represent people of Catholic faith from all over the world. We saw the cardinal from Myanmar, for example, taking the oath, the Book of Gospels there, and you can see the tens of thousands right here at the Vatican, just outside the Basilica. People, you know, the sun, it's a beautiful time of day, sort of the golden hour here in Rome as the sun sets low behind the Basilica there, people holding their hands up to their foreheads just to get a glimpse of what's playing out. We know that inside that Sistine Chapel, Terry Moran, that the top vote getter, the next pope, is asked, do you accept your election as supreme pontiff? An extraordinary question to be asked. The follow-up question is even more important and could be extremely telling for the world, and that is, with what name do you wish to be called?
That's right. That will be the first signal about what kind of man this is and what intentions he has for the church and for his papacy. If he picks Francis II, for example, that's an instance of continuity. He could pick lots of other names. There's 266 popes before him, and so there's a lot of names. He could pick his own name. Some popes have done that, and that will tell us something about it. But I got to tell you that electric charge that went through the square, you know, goes through the city as well. I mean, we can see some of the streets down here below us, and people are pouring to the security points to get into the square, running, almost like with the enthusiasm of a championship sporting event or something. It really has lit up not just the square and the immediate surroundings, but the city as well. It's going to be quite a moment when whoever it is steps out on that balcony.
It's just so exciting, whether you're a member of the Catholic Church or a different faith, or perhaps someone who's just witnessing a piece of history unfold. It is unmistakable, the pageantry, the majesty. The Catholic Church does this very well. They build the anticipation, the excitement, and certainly those who have gathered here in the square know the weight of this moment, that the cardinals who were in that room not only had to take a measure of their peers and decide who was best fit to become pope, but also try to decide who could best meet the moment globally, looking around the world and seeing the conflict, the wars that are unfolding, to see the challenges when it comes to the global economy, climate change, the questions that the church will face going forward. So many of those questions Pope Francis did address. People have strong opinions either way about whether or not he addressed them fully enough and in the right direction. We'll find out shortly which direction the cardinals in that room hope the church will take. I want to show everyone at home, just over my shoulder here. This is obviously St. Peter's Basilica, and it is just extraordinary. I hope you feel that you're right here with us. And the balcony is just over my shoulder here. The red velvet drapes hanging over that balcony have been in place now for quite a few days as we now await for the new pope to be presented to the world. They'll say, Habemus Papam, we have a pope. We remember back when Pope Francis emerged on that balcony, He said, Buenasera, good evening to the crowd. It was a very sort of humble, modest way of introducing himself to the faithful, Father.
Yeah, it might be interesting for people to know what's going to be said. First, you're going to hear Annuncio Vobis Gaudium Magnum. I have news to you of great joy. And then Habemus Papam, as you were saying, David, the famous words, we have a pope. And then you're going to hear Eminentissimum ac Reverendissimum Dominum, the most eminent, the most reverend Lord. And then the person's first name, it's a little bit of a tip-off. And then Sancte Romani Ecclesiae Cardinalum. And then you hear the second name, his last name. And then Qui Sibi Nominum Posuit, which means who has chosen the name. And then you'll hear his name as Pope. So a little bit of a preview of this formula that will be pronounced on the balcony soon.
And they're singing Te Deum if they're sticking to tradition within the Sistine Chapel, which essentially thanks God for helping them in making this decision.
Yeah, it's an ancient chant thanking God. And then also, as I think you said, they will be professing their obedience to him one by one.
They pay homage to the new Pope one by one in that room. There are 133 cardinals, more than we have seen ever before, so it could take a little longer, this period between the white smoke, the cheering here in Vatican City, and the actual moment when we learn, and you're going to learn at home along with all of us right here at the Vatican, who the next Pope will be. It's interesting, each of the popes have sort of received that moment of respect in different ways. Pope Francis was famously a little uncomfortable with fellow cardinals bowing to him in that moment, said it was unnecessary.
Yeah, he didn't like that, and a very famous story about when he went into a convent of nuns and they all went to their knees and he said, get up, I'm not Jesus, you know, I'm just Pope Francis. So, and I think, you know, from what I hear, a lot of them will say, you know, I forgive you for what you've done to me, kind of good-naturedly, because they know it is a very awesome and solemn task that's being imposed on them.
I want to go to Joe Torre from WABC. Our team in New York City is also here covering, and obviously we know there is an enormous Catholic community throughout the United States and certainly in the New York City area. And Joe, you've witnessed just some of the thousands who've raced toward this square to try to get there to witness a piece of history.
David, the vacant seat of the Holy See is no longer vacant. The church and its 1.4 billion followers have a new leader, and as you look over my shoulder, we are about a quarter mile away from, I believe, where Maggie Rulli is located. She's closer to the square, and what you'll see is the crowd will start to fill up in our direction. Starts closer to St. Peter's Basilica, and then starts to filter this way. And as I watch over to the sides, it certainly appears that all of Rome is dumping out and heading in this direction to see, David, what you've been talking about. The first level of anticipation is over, white smoke. Now we move on to the second level of anticipation. Who is it that the cardinals chose to lead the church? One final point before we send it back to you, David. The Pope is a unique position unlike it anywhere in the world. Certainly he's a spiritual leader, he's a moral leader, but he's also the head of state here in the smallest country in the world. So he's a political leader. Look at the paradoxical nature of that. The leader of the smallest country, and David, perhaps he has the biggest pulpit of all. David?
No question about that. Joe Torres, veteran reporter from WABC in New York, has covered the Catholic Church for so many years, and it's great to have you here on the ground with us, Joe. I want to take this back to Terry Moran, who's also watching this unfold with me here at the Vatican, because, Terry, we know after they pay homage to the new Pope, pay their respects, if you will, inside the Sistine Chapel, there comes another powerful and quiet moment, if you will, when they're taken the new Pope is taken into the so-called Room of Tears. And we have seen the images in years past, and certainly the images leading up to this conclave, of the cassocks hanging there in the Room of Tears. They have 3 different sizes prepared, sort of a small, medium, and large. They have shoes gathered there as well. Again, in addition to choosing their name, they choose how they're going to present themselves to the faithful just moments from now.
That's right, and it's changed over the years. Popes, up until, you know, when I was a young person, a child and a young person, they did dress more regally. They had the red cape and ermine, and Pope Benedict XVI brought some of that back. Famously, Pope Francis did not. He didn't take the red shoes, which are supposed to represent the blood of the martyrs that are there for him to wear. He kept his ordinary black tie-up shoes, and I think it's apocryphal, but he's supposed to have said when offered some of the finery, he's supposed to have said, no, no, not for me. The carnival is over. Now, whether he actually said that, I think, is in dispute, but it was reflective of the change that he wanted to make. To bring the papacy down from on high, it was a temporal power for many centuries. They ruled much of Europe and had a kingly bearing. And I think in the 21st century, the way to reach people is probably not by awing them into obedience or faith, but by accompanying them. That Franciscan word that he used so often. And at the end of the day, part of it, the simplicity of his dress communicated. I'm closer to you than someone who's trying to be a king or kingly. And it'll be interesting to see what they wear.
It'll be very interesting, you know, and it might sound small to some people, the choice of shoes or the simplicity beyond that cassock, but it speaks volumes, especially in those first moments when the new Pope is introduced to the world. And Lindsay, there was a story that Pope Francis had shared along the way that after being named Pope, the words of one of his peers in those quiet moments rang loudly in his own mind about don't forget the poor, which is, he said, when that moment appeared to him, that I'll go by Francis, St. Francis of Assisi, who was so focused on the poor and the people at the margins.
Certainly a champion of the poor, as we saw the same with St. Francis himself. It's often that the Pope does rely on someone that they want to revere or honor, be that a saint or be that a previous Pope, and we'll likely see that just in a few moments. One thing I was noticing as we look at the crowd is all the different flags that you see. Brazil, Canada, France, America, Germany, Spain, Argentina. There is such a connection for millions to this centuries-old tradition. And another thing, when we talk about hope with the new Pope, if we look at the church in general, religion is on a decline globally, and so this is a really unifying time.
It is, and as you say, it is a global moment here at St. Peter's Square. You can see it both in the flags and in the symbolism that we're witnessing right now. Swiss Guard now marching here at St. Peter's Square. We're also joined by Father John Walk, an ABC News contributor. And Father Walk, talk us through what we're witnessing right now, and from what history tells us, how long will it be for viewers back home in the U.S. watching before we actually see the new Pope emerge?
It shouldn't be much more than, say, 40 minutes from now. I think when the Pope will appear on the what's called the loggia of St. Peter's, which is right on top of a relief that shows Jesus Christ giving the keys that he promised to Peter. And we're witnessing that transfer, not from Christ to Peter, but from one Pope to the next. That's the transfer that's been going on for 2,000 years. The keys of the kingdom are being passed on to the next successor of Peter. And in the square, what we're seeing is, I think, a very graphic example of how all roads lead to Rome. You mentioned all the flags that you see, the internationality of the crowd, but also the streets of Rome are filling with people pouring out of their homes and their offices and the hotels to make their way to St. Peter's Square. It's becoming a river of humanity towards St. Peter's Square.
A river of humanity, well put, Father. And I want to ask you about that moment inside the Sistine Chapel when a cardinal is asked, do you accept your election as Supreme Pontiff? You know, obviously the answer is yes. And then the question is what name you wish to be called. Pope John Paul II accepted his election, saying, with obedience and faith to Christ my Lord and with trust in the Mother of Christ and the Church, in spite of great difficulties, I accept. In that moment, signaling that he recognized the weight of the role he was about to take on.
Right. It's obviously an enormous weight on the shoulders of the future Pope. And I think it's also important as we see the crowd and the cheerfulness of the crowd to think of the church as a family. It's a family of 1.4 billion people, and they've elected a father, and yet they don't know who the father is. I think we're accustomed to families awaiting the arrival of a child, but in this case, we have a gigantic family awaiting, you could say, the arrival of a dad, who they will be called to love and honor and respect and to treat as a father. And that's part of the weight that the new Pope has to bear. He has to be a father for these people from all over the world, from different cultures and languages and experiences. He's going to be a paternal figure for, you know, a 1.4 billion people.
Father Walk, I wanted to ask you as well about the importance of the name and what that will signal very early on about the next Pope. You know, Francis had been sitting next to, you can hear the swell of the crowd. Let's just listen to the cheers of the crowd for a moment. I'll come back to this. Pope Francis had been sitting next to the Archbishop Emeritus of Sao Paulo, and he said when things started looking dangerous, in his words, according to Francis, when it was starting to look like it was going his way during the counting, Francis said the Brazilian embraced me, kissed me, and said, "Don't forget the poor." And Francis would later say those words came to me, the poor, pointing to his head. He said, right away, thinking of the poor, I thought of Francis of Assisi. Then I thought of all of the wars as the votes were being counted. You know, there was so much to look at across the world and think about, but it'll be so fascinating to hear the name and perhaps a little later on what this new Pope is thinking about in these crucial moments before being introduced to the world, Father.
Yeah, as Father Martin said, we're going to hear three names. We're going to hear a first name, a last name, and then a name that no one knows, except, you know, the cardinals now. Presumably they know what name he's chosen. And it's going to be a reflection, you know, in part probably of personal devotion, a name perhaps of a saint that means something to the new Pope, but also frequently a sense of history. You know, John Paul I took the names of his two predecessors, John the 23rd and Paul VI, and put them together. It was a very strong sign of continuity. And John Paul II took the same name, John, as a sign of continuity as well. Benedict, I think, in part, he put the name Benedict as a sort of patron saint of Christian Europe. One of the founders of Christian Europe is the great monk, founder of Western monasticism, Saint Benedict. And Francis, as you say, took the name of Francis of Assisi. So we can read, probably, we don't know for sure, but a fair bit into the name that the new Pope will take.
And of course, Father Walk, thank you for being here for the coverage, and stick with us here. A lot to witness here together in the coming minutes and hours here in Rome. Father Walk mentions the first name, the last name, and then obviously the name chosen as the new Pope of the Catholic Church. For Catholics watching all over the world, obviously the most important thing out of the gate is the first name and the last name, because they want to know, who is this Pope? Is it the one that perhaps a particular community or corner of the world has been rooting for? You know, whether or not this would be history made here today, or have they chosen an Italian Pope? Are they going to return to some of their historical roots? These are questions we simply do not have answered at this point. As Father Walk said, about 40 minutes or so from now, we should have the new Pope standing there at the balcony. We know back in 2013, the white smoke appeared at about 7:06 in the evening. The bells began ringing about a minute later. Habemus Papam came at about 8:12, so it was an hour and 6 minutes or so after the smoke and the bells that we actually saw the new Pope. So we will keep our cameras trained right there. You're not going to miss a moment of this. Liz Nagy of WLS in Chicago, also part of our team of ABC stations covering this as well. And Liz, I know you've had a chance to talk with many people, Americans and others who have gathered here at the Vatican to witness history. What are they telling you?
David.
We'll come back to Liz in just a moment. As you can imagine, with the cameras and the eyes of the world on the Vatican communications, and perhaps it's just the really tight security with the Sistine Chapel. They swept the chapel and they jammed communications in some parts of the Vatican, and obviously they do that with every conclave to prevent there from being any communication with the cardinals who are inside that room. No newspapers, no television, no cell phones. They gave up the cell phones well before they went into that conclave. Let's go back down to James Longman. He's right in St. Peter's Square. And James, we've been watching the live pictures here, and you're seeing it right behind you, the swelling of this crowd growing in numbers as they wait to meet the new Pope.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, David, what a thrill when that white smoke went into the air. People were screaming, not just because they're seeing white smoke, but because I don't think anybody expected it to come this early. And let's face it, it is early, given how many electors there are, 133. We just did not expect it to come at this time. It feels like this group of men have wanted to give us certainty in a time of great uncertainty. I think this early vote, what they want us to show how united they are, because we've spent the last few days talking about how different all these cardinals are. And they're showing the world that, no, we're on the same page, we are a family, as John Walk said. Just behind me, we just watched the marching band come through. Vatican City is, of course, a state. It has a military, the Swiss Guard. They came through in their marching dress, their formal attire. They marched past us there, and they've gone down. They're still filing up to the balcony, just underneath the balcony there in front of St. Peter's Basilica, because, of course, this Pope is not just the leader of 1.4 billion Catholics, but he's also head of state. So they will stand to attention underneath that balcony, waiting for him to come out. But what an extraordinary moment for all these people who are flooding down. More and more and more of them. But the area behind me, they kept pretty thin for the last few days because they wanted to avoid a crush. Feels like they were saving the space, honestly. And now, no more space to save because people want to get a front seat. And flags from all over the world. People are hoping their guy, maybe he's the one that they've chosen. We had all kinds of different ideas of these different groups, right? Was it going to be a missionary pope? Was it going to be an administrator? Was it going to be a diplomat? Was it going to be one of the more kind of personable candidates? We simply did not know. An early decision like this, or let's say early, possibly this means Parolin. That's what a lot of people were saying, speculating certainly before Conclave, that this many people, this many men, these many cardinals, if they were going to make a decision at this point, it might have meant that someone they knew, like Parolin, was going to be there. But of course, we have no idea.
Yeah, we certainly do not know. James brings up Parolin. For those of you at home watching in the States, that's Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State chosen by Pope Francis to be the chief diplomat, if you will, and really to be at Pope Francis's side during his tenure as Pope. He is from Italy. He's 70, but of course he was just one of many contenders. There were several others from Italy. It wasn't believed that the Pope would be from the United States, given the fact that the U.S. Is a superpower in the world, already has significant influence. The Church has shied away from that in the past, but who knows? There could be a surprise awaiting the world here today. The surprise could come in the form of a Pope that comes from elsewhere in the world, one of the corners of the world that Pope Francis was so determined, Lindsay, to bring into the Church.
What will be so fascinating, because as you talk about, he had appointed more cardinals to the College of Cardinals outside of Europe than any of his predecessors. But what will be interesting to see, as we've been banding about, really, the name that they will choose. And just a little tidbit for the cocktail party. The first pope to change his name was John II back in 533, and that was because his birth name was Mercury. That was considered to be inappropriate for him to be named Mercury as pope because it's the name of a pagan god. And just some fun facts there. John has been the most popular name, chosen 23 times, Gregory 16 times, Benedict 16 times. The only name that we will not hear called today is Peter, because that is basically an unwritten rule that the one pope that Jesus chose himself will not actually be carried on in a subsequent pope.
So no Peter, but perhaps one of the other names that you mentioned, perhaps will surprise us and go their own way like Pope Francis did. As you look at the live pictures of not only the band marching, the Swiss Guard, you also see the balcony there, the eyes of the world on that balcony, where we will hear not only, as Father Walk pointed out, the first name, the last name, but the chosen name of the cardinal inside the Sistine Chapel, who is now the Pope of the Catholic Church. You know, the moment they accept, I mentioned that question earlier, do you accept your election to Supreme Pontiff? The moment they say yes, they are the Pope of the Catholic Church. So it's a relatively small window of about an hour's time that they have privacy from the rest of the world in a role larger than life, if you will. We will get to know who they are in just moments. You can hear the band performing. The new Pope, as I mentioned before in this interim, goes to the room of tears where the white papal vestments await, multiple sizes at the ready, the shoes, and again, we mentioned Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II didn't go with some of the shoes that had been presented, chose simple, black leather shoes that they wore throughout their papacy. The Carmelengo places the ring of the fourth finger of the Pope's right hand, kneels and kisses that ring, actually. That is also playing out. Then the Carmelengo, then each of the cardinals approaches the new Pope, as we mentioned. They kneel before him in an act of obedience to pay their respects, to wish the Pope well. And it's extraordinary to think that they were sitting in the room with the Pope having lunch just a few hours ago. The cardinal at that point did not know that he would become Pope. When you think about it in those terms, Father Martin, it's quite extraordinary, right? I mean, they don't get to talk during the election itself when they're in the Sistine Chapel, but during the lunches and during dinners, they can lean on one another. They can ask questions. Well, what do you think about the cardinal at the top of the list getting the most votes so far? There isn't, strong-arming, the sort of politicking that we're used to back in the United States, but there is a fair amount of campaigning that we just never get to witness ourselves. But to think they were just having lunch together with the person who would become Pope just about an hour or two later.
It is amazing, and what we call in the church the grace of office comes upon someone, which is we believe that the Holy Spirit gives the person the grace and the ability and the capability to carry out the office. And a number of popes have written and have said that after they accept, they feel differently. They feel a sense of kind of freedom and a sense of sort of inspiration. I think it's also important to look at it from a spiritual point of view. Catholics believe this is the successor of St. Peter. It's an unbroken line from Peter to whoever the new Pope is. And also a small thing, Catholics around the world, if you go to Mass every Sunday, you will hear this person's name in the Eucharistic prayer now. So back in New York, it was Francis, our Pope, Timothy, our Bishop, and now Catholics everywhere are going to hear every Sunday the name that we still don't know, which is very exciting.
Behind closed doors right now, the new Pope already beginning his duties. He'll actually lead the cardinals in Te Deum, and he'll give him his benediction. And of course, Te Deum is giving thanks.
Yeah, it's a traditional and ancient prayer of giving thanks to God. Certainly they've been asking for the help of the Holy Spirit. They've received the Holy Spirit now, and very quickly. And so it's appropriate that they will give thanks to God. And I think they are probably just as excited as we are, to give their obedience to their new spiritual leader.
The new Pope, after giving his benediction, is then led down the Hall of Blessings to that central window. You can see the cameras, and it's not just ours, the cameras of the world are trained on this balcony. The Pope is led down the Hall of Blessings to that central window of St. Peter's Basilica, where tens of thousands have gathered in the square. I can't wait for you to hear this swell of applause when they see the Pope emerge on that balcony. We believe that it'll be Cardinal Protodeacon Dominique Momberti of France who will announce to the world the name of the new Pope. After that, Cardinal Momberti goes back inside St. Peter's. The balcony will be prepped for the new Pope's appearance. Then the new Pope appears on the balcony sometime after that announcement, greets the crowd, and delivers the apostolic blessing, really to the city and to the world watching this moment. Father Walker, it's really impossible for any of us to understand what it must feel like for the new Pope to walk down the Hall of Blessings, to think about it in terms of how they will address the faithful and really the world for the first time, and what's most appropriate for the message they want to send.
Yeah, one of the traditions the popes have observed is when they come out of the Sistine Chapel, before going to the balcony where they're going to give the blessing from St. Peter's facade, they stop in the Pauline Chapel where the cardinals gathered before the Conclave. And in that chapel, he's going to be facing the fresco by Michelangelo of the crucifixion of the first Pope, of Peter being crucified upside down. You think that's the first thing that he sees as he's about to face the world, the first Pope giving his life in fidelity to Jesus Christ. And it's a reminder that the Good Shepherd, right? Christ is the Good Shepherd, and he lays down his life for his sheep. And that's what the Pope is being called to do, is being called to give his life entirely to the people he's about to be introduced to and discover, as I was saying earlier, as his children. He's about to see, all of a sudden, I am the father of this massive crowd in the square of people from all over the world.
It's been about 39 minutes now, Father Walk, since we saw that white smoke and the ringing of the bells. We know from recent conclaves it's about an hour, a little more than an hour sometimes. They could surprise us by coming to us a little earlier with the new Pope. But Father Walk, I'm curious what you think, and I know it's very hard to speculate, but what you think about this coming after the fourth ballot. You know, there was so much talk about 133 cardinals, more than we have seen in modern times, that they come from all over the world, that many had not met each other, didn't know each other very well. There was some who believed that meant we could be here for a little while longer, but instead what we've witnessed here is quite similar to what we saw with Pope Benedict and then with Pope Francis on the fourth and fifth ballots, having a decision so soon.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising, but I think we're gonna hear different hypotheses about how it turned out this way. But it may, in fact, be that the very fact that there were people who were from so many different places, 133 cardinals who didn't necessarily know each other, actually ended up limiting the choices, right? And so that they were actually had to focus on a fairly small number of possible candidates, and that may have made it, in a way, easier, because by limiting the possibilities to a select few that were better known, it made it easier for them to choose a pope in a relatively short period of time.
I know there were a lot of people trying to figure out what the timing means, Father Walk. Does it mean they continue down a path that Pope Francis began? Does it mean they tried to find someone who's a centrist who can reach out in a very human way like Pope Francis did, but also be somewhat safer for the traditionalists, the more conservative wing of the Catholic Church? You want to weigh in on what the timing of this might signal?
I don't think that the timing is going to tell us the answer to those questions. And I think in terms of the route that the Pope will take, it's going to be hard to know immediately, because the different areas of the church, I mean, the different parts of geographically, parts of the church, see those questions in different ways. What it means in Africa, what it means in Asia, what it means in Latin America and Europe and North America is not necessarily the same. And so to see it in terms of sort of right or left or progressive or conservative, it's going to be a little more complicated, I think. We have our sort of American or Western European ways of reading that, but the cardinals who elected the Pope may not see things quite in those terms.
I think you're absolutely right. It's far more nuanced than conservative or more progressive. And you talk about the geography involved, the new cardinals who were brought into the church by Pope Francis. We know that about 80% of the cardinals who were voting in the Sistine Chapel were actually chosen by Pope Francis. And of course, for those of you following our reporting the last few days, you heard us say this a number of times. You can only vote as a cardinal if you're under 80. In fact, one of the cardinals in the room, it's his 80th birthday next week. So we got into that very influential moment just in time before those doors closed, if you will, to play a significant role. Each one of those 133 cardinals playing a very important role at this turning point for the Catholic Church. Of course, one of them is now the Pope. One of the interesting things is you have to get a 2/3 majority, which means 89 votes inside the chapel. It can't be unanimous, because if it was a unanimous vote, if everyone chose the same person, that would mean one of the cardinals voted for themselves, which is not allowed, Father Martin, is it?
Not allowed, and also bad form, and also against humility. I think that they're very aware of the need for secrecy, following rules. This is an ancient tradition that has been laid down for generations, sort of revised a little bit by John Paul and by Benedict and Francis, but these cardinals are deeply aware of the solemnity and the gravity of this decision.
Now, as I understand it, Father Martin, the tallies of each one of these votes, and again, this could have been the fourth vote or the fifth vote. We believe it was the fourth, just giving the timing. We know there were 2 votes planned for this afternoon. Whether or not they needed both of them or not, we're going to find out here in the ensuing hours. It's our belief that it was just the fourth vote. But obviously, you had 3 cardinals in the front of that room who were chosen with each vote, and it's their job to read the ballots. They pass the ballot to the cardinal next to them, who then confirms the name and then passes the cardinal next to them, who then reads the name aloud to the Sistine Chapel. The fellow cardinals then hear who has received a vote. It's then attached to a thread. All of the paper ballots are put on a single thread, and at the end of these voting sessions, they're then burned in the stove in the Sistine Chapel. So there's no actual record. The ballots aren't saved. The only record is the tally that they keep track of. In the separate stove is where they use the chemicals now, just to make sure that that smoke is clearly white or clearly black. And I have to say, we appreciate them for doing that today, because it can be nerve-wracking when you come on the air. In the beginning of the black smoke, it looks a little gray and you're just a little uncertain, but there was really no uncertainty with the white smoke that emerged just about 40 minutes or so now ago here at Vatican City. But Father Martin, it's my understanding that with each one of these votes, the numeric tally, which they keep a record of, is then sealed and handed to the new Pope. And it's up to the new Pope whether or not we learn what the numbers were in the coming months or years.
That's right. Sometimes the numbers have come out, cardinals, or some people find out about it. But in the oath that they took just recently that we heard, they promised to keep it safe and keep it secure, as you said, David, unless the new Pope allows them to reveal it.
St. Peter holding the key there to the papacy, obviously extraordinarily symbolic in this moment. We'll have to wait and see how secretive these cardinals are. Just to get back to your point, Father Martin, because we did learn over time, and in fact, Pope Francis described the moment as he said things were starting to go a dangerous way, meaning his way. We do know that in 2013, when Pope Francis was elected, he had done well in the previous conclave with Pope Benedict, who was eventually named, but Pope Francis did very well in that conclave as far as the number of votes. But when he returned all those years later, he was older. He didn't think that, he thought his opportunity, his time, his moment had passed. He brought his suitcase and he had in his bag his return ticket, did he not?
That's right. And in 2005, earlier, the conclave that elected Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, or Jorge Mario Bergoglio, came in second, and he felt that he was being used by people to block Cardinal Ratzinger's move to becoming Pope. And so he asked his people, the people who were supporting him, to not support him any longer. But you're right, David, in 2013 he was seen, I think, widely as just too old.
But he wasn't, and he was in the papacy for a good number of years and had a tremendous influence, certainly with the cardinals that he appointed, and addressing many of the issues that do face the church, from finances to LGBTQ to the role of women in the church, the sex abuse scandal, which is not something unique to the United States. It's obviously an issue that they have had to deal with throughout the world. I want to bring in Liz Nagy of WLS. We mentioned she was with our coverage here earlier in the crowd, fighting the communication and the crush of media here, and hopefully we can hear you this time. Liz, what are folks telling you?
David, people are just absolutely thrilled to be here. There's frankly very little room left to move around in St. Peter's Square, because there are tens of thousands of people who have rushed in over the last 45 minutes or so to see that Pope emerge on the balcony. And I'm struck that the diversity in this crowd out here really reflects the diversity of the College of Cardinals that was sitting in the Sistine Chapel. There's a person I'm not sure you can see propped up on a fence over there with a Brazilian flag wrapped around their shoulders. We've seen people walking around with Filipino flags, people chanting the names of their countries, but also you can see people greeting complete strangers. This is really a moment of celebration, not just for Catholics of the world, but for people who are here in Rome. I'm also struck by the number of young people who are here. We've spoken to a lot of students this week who've been studying abroad in Rome and just happen to be lucky enough to be here during this experience. Some who say they've been moved to get more in touch with their spirituality because of all of this. There are children propped on the shoulders of their parents, and everybody's doing sort of exactly what we're doing right now, staring into the sun, trying to crane their neck and see who is going to emerge on the balcony. And because of the time of day and the westward-facing direction of St. Peter's Square, it's a little difficult, but nevertheless, people are thrilled to see who will come out there. There was one priest who just walked by a few minutes ago. I said, do you know who is going to step out on that balcony? And he said, of course, the Pope. So for Catholics who we've spoken to this week, they say it really doesn't matter who that person is. The Catholic Church is universal, and this will be their leader. David?
I love the answer to that question from you. Of course, the Pope, Liz Nagy of WLS in Chicago, also joining our team here on the ground. Our thanks to you, Liz. Again, you see the cameras trained on that balcony. The Hall of Blessings, the Pope will be led down that hall. He will be introduced, first name, last name, and then his chosen name as the Pope, as the leader of the Catholic Church. Will then emerge. He'll greet the crowd, and much will be made of how he chooses to greet the crowd, the words he chooses, and then, of course, his message to the crowd thereafter. James Longman is right down in St. Peter's Square. And James, you heard Terry and me. We were talking about the Room of Tears where the cassocks are hanging. I would gather, given the amount of time that has gone by, the cassock has now been chosen and the Pope has begun his duties. But you actually talked with the family, the long-standing family, a rich tradition of preparing for that moment.
Yeah, Ranieri Mancinelli was a charming man, a tailor who actually, both Terry and I met him, but I had the fortune of going to his tailor to see the 3 actual cassocks that were going to get delivered to the Vatican the very next day. The white cassock, the traditional vestments of the Pope. They have the 33 buttons down the front to signal every year that Christ lived. He told me that he's made 3 sizes for width, but not for height, because he doesn't want to go to all the lengths of making 3 separate cassocks, because he's going to have to make a specific one for the specific man. But it was incredibly charming to meet him. I mean, what an extraordinary man doing something so special. And he said to me that he's made a slight tweak to each of them, each of the 3 sizes, so that when the Pope, who we don't know yet, comes out on that balcony, he will alone, outside of the Vatican, know which of those 3 sizes this man has chosen, which I rather liked. But we understand that the Mancinelli tailor was a place that Francis found whilst out and about before he became Pope Francis, when then Cardinal Bergoglio was out and about. It's actually sandwiched between an ice cream shop and a pizza restaurant. And he bought his very simple silver cross from there. And so when he became Pope, he decided, well, I might as well have my vestments made from there too. So the Mancinellis have now taken on this extraordinary duty of dressing the Pope. But yes, this as yet unknown man is now dressing into one of these 3 cassocks to take on one of the most important offices in the world.
The Mancinellis, the most famous and important fashion house in Italy at this moment. You don't say that very often, right, given all the other names out there in the commercial world. But James, that's extraordinary in detail. So there is something about each of the cassocks that's actually different that only the tailor will know? Or did you ask what we should be looking for to know the difference here?
He wouldn't tell us. I mean, presumably it's not going to be very, very obvious, because that would be sacrilege, I assume. But yes, some tweak, perhaps to the fold on the shoulder, perhaps somewhere on the neckline, something a tailor may only know. Those of us lay people might not actually realize what it actually is. But he wouldn't give us the little secret. He was very proud of it, though, of course.
Yeah, he should be proud of it, and he's certainly deserving to have his own connection to this moment in history. You know, Lindsay, we were down in the square, and I was talking with a group of sisters from the United States, really from Ohio to Texas, New York to Michigan. They lead their congregations, and they had this trip planned long before the conclave, and they told me that they're hoping that no matter what the decision is, and again, as Father Walk so aptly put earlier, there are a number of different issues and many different ways to tackle them. It can't be just one category or the other. But they did say to me, they said, we hope the cardinals in the Sistine Chapel recognize the human touch of Pope Francis, the way he was able to connect even beyond the Catholic Church.
He was so beloved, of course, people called him the people's Pope. But the saying, David, goes, a fat Pope follows a thin one. And the idea here is that often, whenever there's a new opportunity to elect a new pope, that it's a referendum basically on the previous papacy. And I think that that's what many people are so curious, if not anxious, to determine today. Are these cardinals going to select continuity or change? Really, and I mentioned earlier how globally religion is declining, but in particular in the Catholic Church, if you look at Europe, they lost about 1.5 million Catholics just between 2013 and 2022. Africa, on the other hand, it's the fastest growing region for Catholics. At least 20% of Catholics reside on that continent. And this is an opportunity really to change the face, a very unique opportunity that only comes along every 12 or so years.
And in addition, Lindsay, to trying to grow the church, Father Martin, we find ourselves in an historical moment when you look around the world, when you see in terms of global conflict, in terms of the deep political polarization, not just back in the United States where there's a deep political divide, but in so many countries across the world and parts of Europe that we're witnessing right now as well. And in addition to trying to grow the church, which Pope Francis tried to do, he also was successful somewhat in reaching out as a global leader, whether he wanted to or not, even beyond the Catholic Church, when it came to certain issues that political leaders, were not as successful in doing.
Well, I think that's right, particularly on issues of the poor, climate change, his famous encyclical Laudato Si, migrants and refugees. I think one of the things to keep in mind, though, as we're talking about the new Pope, is he may be a very different kind of Pope than he was as a cardinal, right? I was just speaking to a church historian who said John the 23rd was seen as a transitional Pope. He called the Second Vatican Council. By some, John Paul II was supposed to be a certain kind of Pope and was a different kind of Pope than people expected. There really is a sense that the man who was a cardinal now has a different role, and he has to, as you say, sort of be an actor on the world stage and really be the father that John Walk was talking about. So I think if the man comes out and people think, oh, he's not my candidate, I would say we need to see what kind of Pope he is, not simply what kind of cardinal he was.
And not to look at it in political terms or in categorical terms, because as you say, the moment they become Pope, you would think that each one of these cardinals recognizes that the role is much larger and that the faithful around the world are counting on them to be heard.
Oh, sure. And, for example, if he's from a particular archdiocese or diocese, he's focused on that archdiocese or diocese. Now he's focused on the whole world. And he knows that he has to be a father to everyone. And I think this, once again, we say the grace of office is something that they trust. So we also need to give the man at least a couple of months to see what kind of Pope he wants to be.
Father John Walk, for our viewers back in the United States watching, we're now more than 50 minutes past the white smoke, the ringing of the bells, where our cameras are trained on that balcony. What do you suppose is playing out inside St. Peter's right now?
I imagine that the cardinals are gathering together and making their way towards the facade. I think in the past what has happened, as I recall, has been the windows that are to the side of the loggia where the Pope will appear. Sometimes those windows open first, and cardinals come out also on those balconies before. So you have a sense of sort of growing anticipation, even before the Habemus Papam moment, where we hear the names, as we were saying earlier. There's a sense of activity going on on that floor of the basilica, which is actually parallel. I mean, it's at the same level as the Sistine Chapel. They're making their way over from the Sistine Chapel into the upper level of St. Peter's Basilica, and they start filling out on the windows.
There are so many of these crucial moments along the way with this conclave that is now wrapped up. You have extra omnes, which is the final order inside the Sistine Chapel, that everyone who is not an elector, a cardinal who would be voting, that they would leave. We watched those images play out 24 hours ago, people leaving the Sistine Chapel, the doors then closing, echoing across the Vatican, if you will, when those doors close, Swiss guards standing outside. And Father Walk, you bring up Habemus Papam, which the whole world knows means we have a Pope.
Exactly. And of course, for him, as I said earlier, he has children, and it's got to be an enormous shock for whoever is the new Pope to walk out onto that balcony and look at the crowd and have that feeling they're here for me. People that perhaps didn't know who he was this morning. And all of a sudden he's in this completely new and transformative relationship with so many people, not just in the square, but all over the world.
Father Walk with us here today, Father John Walk, an ABC News contributor. And Father Walk, we appreciate your insight, helping to guide us through what's playing out. Father Martin, you know the cardinals, many of them who were in that room voting. I just have to get inside your mind if I can. Are you wondering if it's going to be someone you know well who is now the new Pope?
Oh, sure I am. I think it would be interesting. It's not about me, of course, but I do know a lot of the cardinals. And I think one of the things that I really respect about them is that all of them will tell you this is the most important thing that they do. right? So some of them are bishops and some of them are archbishops of big archdioceses. That's certainly important. But this is kind of an awesome responsibility. And I asked one the other day, I said, well, how do you feel? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you worried? And he just was kind of speechless. And he said it's very hard to describe. So this is something they take very seriously. In a sense, once they're made cardinals, they start thinking about it. Who will I elect? And I also think there's a sense of gratitude and relief. And also, David, this is their boss now. And so they're sort of reconfiguring their relationship to this person who was a peer just a few hours ago.
I'll ask you the same question I asked Father Walk. Do you think the relative shortness to this process signals anything that we got here on the fourth vote like we did with Benedict and Pope Francis?
Well, we'll find out soon enough, but I think Father Walk is right in terms of the fact that since there were so many people from so many far-flung countries who may not have known one another, thanks to Pope Francis's desire to sort of diversify geographically, they may have focused on certain candidates, so maybe 3 or 4 candidates, which would have made for a shorter conclave.
It is an enormous responsibility, isn't it, for all the cardinals inside that room to not only choose someone they believe in, but that they believe is the right person at this moment for the Catholic Church.
Well, that's right, and it's not 2013, it's 2025. And also, David, I think there's a sense of we are choosing someone, we are electing someone, we are recognizing someone that the Holy Spirit seems to be pointing out to us, but we are also giving this man a tremendous burden, right? So there's a kind of sense of gravity and almost pity on the person, right, that they're giving this burden to, because no one, let's face it, no one has a job like the Pope.
For those of you watching from back in the United States and joining us from all over the world, it is now 7:09 here at the Vatican, shortly after 1 p.m. in the East. You're watching ABC News live coverage of the Conclave, the next Pope about to be presented to the world at any moment. Of course, that's the famous balcony here at St. Peter's Basilica. The new Pope will be brought down the Hall of Blessings there, behind that window you're looking at, that doorway. He will be announced first with his first name, his last name, and then his chosen name as Pope. We know that shortly after they reached that 2/3 majority inside the Sistine Chapel, which in this case meant 89 votes, and certainly this Pope likely got even more than that, that they are then asked, do you accept the results of this election to be the supreme pontiff? When they say yes, the second question, equally as important, is how do you want to be called? What is your chosen name as Pope? We do know about an hour has gone by. We are expecting to meet the Pope for the first time at any moment. That's why our camera is staying right there. You will not miss it. We know the Pope has already been brought into the Room of Tears, as it's called, and it's called that because it allows the Pope, the new Pope, to have a moment of reflection, to perhaps sort of be quiet in a moment of prayer about the new role they will take on, and perhaps shed a tear, understanding the weight of this moment. And as Father Martin put so aptly, it's not 2013, it's 2025, and each one of these conclaves is about naming the leader at this moment who can best take the Catholic Church in the direction it needs to go, to not only reach the faithful, but to grow the Church. That's their goal. And of course, tackle some of the very difficult issues that each one of these popes tries to tackle in their own way. I think back to Pope John Paul II. I grew up as Pope John Paul II was a leader on the world stage. And Father Martin, he was a bit of a surprise when he emerged on that balcony, and we could be surprised here today.
He was, and in fact, when he was announced, many people didn't know how to pronounce his name. They didn't know where he was from. But amazingly, this Pope that was such a surprise was on the world stage for so long and changed the Church in so many different ways. We could be totally surprised. My sense is that it is probably one of the top 10 or 12 candidates that we have been talking about, that everyone's been talking about. But again, who knows who the Holy Spirit has sort of directed these men to vote for.
And Terry Moran, Pope John Paul II, as we know, when we learned of him on that balcony, and of course, you and I were a little young, not yet reporters, but perhaps dreaming of being one, that so many people butchered his name, didn't know where he was from, but he was a pope for a long time, because as far as these conclaves go, he was very young.
He was very young. He was 58 when he was elected pope, and he was there for decades, and a global figure. A figure of historic proportions. he grasped this office, this ancient office, with such power, so much of it, however, almost in the spirit rather than in actual temporal power, and he used it.
Terry, let's take a pause and watch the balcony.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum, ac reverendissimum Dominum, Dominum Robertum Franciscum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae, Cardinalem Prevost, qui sibi nomen imposuit Leonem XIV.
And again, we have just heard that Robert Francis Prevost of the United States, 69 years old, born in Chicago, has been named the next Pope. There you see a picture of him on the left-hand side of your screen. There had been so much talk about whether or not there was a slim possibility that there would be an American Pope, one from the United States. He went to college at Villanova, studied mathematics. Italian media has referred to him as the least American of the Americans because of his quiet, humble way. He had years of missionary experience in Peru, strong connections in Latin America and with bishops. And through the years, he said very little about the church's divisive subjects, same-sex blessings, female ordination, helping him to maintain a broad appeal before we hear from him. And the name he has chosen is Leo XIV. Again, Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost of the United States, making history, the first Pope ever chosen from the U.S., and he will be called Pope Leo XIV. Let's listen. Of course, the world waiting to hear from the next Pope, Robert Francis Prevost, of course, the Cardinal from Chicago, originally born there, 69 years old. For the past 2 years, he served as the head of the Vatican's powerful group of bishops. He was, in fact, responsible for advising Pope Francis on picking the new bishops around the world. He's held many leadership positions within the Catholic Church: religious superior, bishop. He has shown his capacity to govern, and he has certainly shown his ability to be a diplomat within the Church. Pope Francis relying on him heavily through the years. You can see the tens of thousands who gathered here in St. Peter's Square. Obviously, we don't want to talk over the moment, but let's just watch the screen here. And Father Martin, what do you know about Cardinal Prevost?
He's a wonderful person. I got to know him at the Synod. He's very down to earth. He's kind. He's very humble and very soft-spoken. One of the interesting things is that he was prior general of the Augustinian order. People would know that mainly in the United States from Villanova. Being prior general means that you are someone whom the entire order looks up to, and it's an awesome responsibility. He was interestingly seen as, in a sense, the least American of the Americans because of his time in the diocese in Peru. But I came to know him. He was at my table at the Synod for 2 weeks. He's very soft-spoken.
That was last fall.
That was last fall. He's a very soft-spoken, but I would say firm person. He was confident in his decisions and easy to talk to, and it's quite a surprise.
We know that Leo had been chosen 13 times before, which is why he's Pope Leo XIV. And what can we read into the name, Father?
Leo XIII was one of the founders of the Catholic social justice tradition. So Catholic social teaching really began with Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum, which was on many things, including the rights of workers. So it's a nod, I think, and we can hear it from the new Pope, to this tradition of Catholic social teaching.
The rights of workers around the world. The eyes of the world now trained on the balcony here at St. Peter's Basilica, and we have watched an extraordinary piece of history unfold here today. The first Pope chosen from the United States, Robert Francis Prevost. Cardinal Prevost, originally from Chicago, born there in 1955. Relatively young for these conclaves, 69 years old, which means, Lindsay, he could have this role as leader of the entire Catholic Church, 1.4 billion Catholics, for some time to come.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, David. But we've talked about how in thousands of years we've never had a Pope in America. First time you're ever having a cardinal who is a Cubs fan. Leo is actually the 5th most popular name chosen by popes. But certainly he is considered similar to Pope Francis on church issues. He's known to have kept his cards very close to the vest, described as being more pragmatic, cautious, and discreet than Pope Francis. But it makes sense because he has been the point person with so many of these bishops worldwide that he already had a number of touch points then going into this conclave. He's also described as having a heart of a missionary and years of ministerial experience, with, of course, is very important. There were a number of people who were considered to be front runners and on the short list, but they didn't necessarily have that pastoral experience.
And not only that, among those who were on the short list, and he was on this list, a lot of people thought because he's from the United States, because we haven't seen that before, and because the United States has such a large role in the world stage already as one of the world's superpowers, would the cardinals inside the Sistine Chapel decide to make history by choosing a cardinal from the United States anyway? And that is exactly what they have done here today. Francis actually brought Cardinal Prevost to the Vatican in 2023 to serve as the powerful head of the office that actually vets the bishop nominations from around the world. As we know, that's one of the most important jobs within the Catholic Church. You'd have to gather that because of that, Prevost had some prominence going into the conclave, that he was part of choosing the bishops. He interacted with them, obviously. Father Martin, you said just this last fall, you were with him as part of the major conference here. So they knew him. This was one of the leaders as they went into the Sistine Chapel and those doors closed. He was one of the faces, one of the leaders they had a sense of.
They did. And let me say that one of the things I heard around Rome, and it is true, you really can find, and I think this is fair, there's no one who has a bad thing to say about him. He's a good administrator. He's kind. He's humble. He's very pragmatic, and I also think that, we were talking earlier, Father Walk was talking about how these bishops from far-flung places would need to know this person. And the head of the dicastery for bishops, as you said, is responsible for basically advising Pope Francis who should be the next bishop in a particular diocese. That's a hugely important job, right? It's hugely influential. He would know the new bishops, and people would know him as well.
We're seeing a little bit of movement on the balcony. It would be impossible to overstate what this must be like for Pope Leo XIV from the United States. Let's listen.
La pace sia con tutti voi. Fratelli, sorelle carissimi, questo è il primo saluto del Cristo risorto, il buon pastore che ha dato la vita per il gregge di Dio. Anch'io vorrei che questo saluto di pace entrasse nel vostro cuore, raggiungesse le vostre famiglie, a tutte le persone, ovunque siano,
Greetings,
a
brothers
tutti
and
i popoli,
sisters.
a tutta la terra.
This is the
La
first
pace
greeting
sia con voi.
of the risen Christ. May the peace be with you.
Questa è la pace di Cristo risorto. Una
This is
pace
the peace
disarmata,
of the
una
risen
pace
Christ.
disarmante, umile e perseverante.
A peace
Proviene da Dio,
that is humble
Dio che ci
and
ama
perseverant
tutti,
for all.
incondizionalmente. Ancora conserviamo nei nostri orecchi quella voce debole ma sempre coraggiosa di Papa Francesco che benediva Roma.
Of course, we preserve our prayers for Pope Francis,
Il Papa che benediva
who
Roma dava la sua
lives
benedizione
in Rome.
al mondo intero, quella mattina del giorno di Pasqua.
who passed away
Consentitemi
on
di
the
dar
morning
seguito a
of Easter,
quella stessa
after Easter.
benedizione. Dio ci vuole bene, Dio vi ama tutti e il
Dio
male non
wants
prevarrà.
what's good for
Siamo
you.
tutti
He loves
nelle
you
mani di
all,
Dio.
and we remain all
Pertanto,
in God,
senza paura,
without
uniti,
fear,
mano nella mano con Dio e
hand
tra
in
di
hand
noi
with God.
andiamo avanti.
We go forward.
Siamo discepoli di Cristo.
We are disciples of
Cristo ci
Christ.
precede. Il mondo ha bisogno della sua
Christ
luce.
goes before us.
L'umanità necessita di Lui come il ponte per essere raggiunta da Dio e dal suo amore. Aiutateci anche voi, poi gli uni gli
Help
altri,
yourselves
a costruire
and help
ponti
one another
con il dialogo,
for
con
building
l'incontro,
bridges
unendoci tutti
and for
per
a
essere
dialogue,
un solo popolo, sempre in pace.
for being a
Grazie a
people
Papa Francesco.
always in peace. Thank you to Pope Francis.
Voglio ringraziare anche tutti i confratelli cardinali che hanno scelto me per essere successore di Pietro e camminare insieme a voi come Chiesa unita, cercando sempre la pace, la giustizia.
And I want to
cercando
thank
sempre
all
lavorare come uomini
the fellow
e
cardinals
donne
who
fedeli a
chose
Gesù
me to be the
Cristo,
successor of
senza
Peter
paura, per
in a united
proclamare
church,
il Vangelo, per essere missionari.
and for pronouncing the Evangelium, and for being
Sono
successors
un figlio
of
di
Christ
Sant'Agostino,
in peace.
agostiniano, che ha detto: con voi
Saint
sono cristiano
Augustine.
e per voi vescovo. In questo senso possiamo tutti camminare insieme verso quella patria la quale Dio ci ha preparato.
We walk together, as St. Augustine said,
Alla
towards
Chiesa
Christ, that God, on
di
the path that
Roma,
God
un
prepared.
saluto speciale.
A special greeting.
Dobbiamo cercare insieme come essere una Chiesa missionaria, una Chiesa che costruisce i ponti, il dialogo, sempre aperta a ricevere, come questa piazza con le braccia aperte, a tutti coloro che hanno bisogno della nostra carità, la nostra presenza, il dialogo, l'amore.
We have to be a church that works together to build bridges and to keep our arms open, like this very piazza, welcoming.
A todos aquellos, y en modo particular a mi querida diócesis de Chiclayo en el Perú.
He says, a special greeting to
Donde
the people
un
of
pueblo fiel
Peru.
ha acompañado a su obispo, ha compartido su fe y ha dado tanto para seguir siendo iglesia fiel de Jesucristo.
who have been so faithful in their following of the Church
di
of
Roma,
Christ.
d'Italia, di tutto il mondo. Vogliamo essere una chiesa
Brothers and
sinodale, una
sisters of
chiesa
Italy,
che cammina, una chiesa che cerca sempre la pace, cerca
who form
sempre la
a
carità,
church
cerca sempre di essere
that
vicino,
searches
specialmente
for
a coloro
peace
che soffrono.
and to help those who are in need.
Oggi
Today,
il giorno della supplica alla Madonna di Pompei.
the day of the supplication of
Nostra
the
Madre
Madonna
Maria
of Pompeii.
vuole sempre camminare con noi, stare vicino,
Mary, our Mary,
aiutarci con
always
la sua
wants to walk
intercessione,
with
il suo
us,
amore.
to help us,
Allora vorrei pregare
to give us
insieme a
love.
voi. Preghiamo insieme
Let us pray
per questa
together
nuova missione,
for this
per
new
tutta
mission,
la Chiesa, per la pace
for
nel mondo.
the whole
E
church,
chiediamo questa
and
grazia
peace
speciale
on earth,
di Maria,
and the
nostra
special
madre.
grace of Mary,
Ave
our
Maria,
mother.
piena di grazia,
Hail
il
Mary,
Signore è con
full
te.
of grace,
Tu sei
the
benedetta fra
Lord
le
is with
donne,
you.
e benedetto è il
Blessed art
frutto del
thou
tuo seno,
among
Gesù.
women,
Santa
and
Maria,
blessed is the
Madre
fruit
di Dio,
of thy
prega per
womb,
noi
Jesus.
peccatori, adesso
Holy
e
Mary,
nell'ora della
Mother of
nostra
God,
morte.
pray for us
Amen.
sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Il Santo Padre Leone, a tutti i fedeli presenti e a quelli che ricevono la sua benedizione a mezzo della radio, della televisione e delle altre tecnologie di comunicazione, concede l'indulgenza plenaria nella forma stabilita dalla Chiesa. Preghiamo Dio Onnipotente perché conservi a lungo il Papa a guida della Chiesa e conceda pace e unità alla Chiesa in tutto il mondo.
For all those, both here and listening throughout the world, and receiving this blessing from the Pope Leo XIV, let us hear
Sancti
his
Apostoli
prayer.
Petrus et Paulus, de quorum potestate autoritate confidimus, ipsi intercedat pro nobis ad Dominum. Amen. Precibus et
Saint
meritis Beate
Peter and
Mariae
Paul,
semper Virginis,
let them
Beati
intercede
Michaelis
on our
Archangelis,
behalf.
Beati Ioannis
We pray to them.
Baptiste, et Sanctorum Apostolorum Petri et Pauli et omnium Sanctorum, misereatur vestri omnipotens Deus, et dimissis omnibus peccatis vestris, perducat vos Iesus Christus ad vitam aeternam.
For St. Peter and Paul,
Indulgentiam, absolutionem,
who
et remissionem omnium
have mercy
peccatorum
on
vestrorum,
us and all the other
spatium
saints
vere
as well,
et
on us.
fructuose penitentiae,
And
for
Jesus
semper
Christ,
penitens,
may he lead
et
us
emendationem vitae,
in peace.
gratiam et consolationem Sancti Spiritus, et finalem perseverantiam in bonis operibus tribuat vobis omnipotens et misericors Dominus. Amen. Et benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus
And may
Sancti descendat super vos
the
et maniat
benediction
semper.
of the all-powerful Lord bless you and be with you always.
You see the American flag there in the crowd. Americans, of course, among the faithful, holding up various American flags across St. Peter's Square as the world studies the face of Pope Leo XIV on that balcony. He opened by saying, "Peace be with you," addressing his brothers and sisters here in St. Peter's Square and around the world. He said, "We preserve our prayers for Pope Francis," and he went on to say, "God loves everyone." He talked about building bridges. He talked about helping those in need. The choice of the name Leo, obviously, extremely significant. We knew that going in, that however the new Pope presented themselves to the world, in particular the name they would choose would be the first signal here. Leo is the name of one of the consensus best popes in church history, Leo, better known as Leo the Great. And the most recent pope of that name served in the early 1900s. And he was best remembered in 1891 for laying out the foundation of modern Catholic social teaching, which pushed for social justice for workers, laborers around the world. Father Martin, I know that you know Pope Leo XIV. You knew him as Cardinal Prevost from Chicago, and you sat across from him just last fall for a couple of weeks at the Synod, right?
I did. I'm a little stupefied right now. I met him first in the company of another Jesuit. We were walking right around Vatican City, and my friend said, "Oh, look, there's Cardinal Prevost," and walked up to him and had a little conversation, very down to earth, very forthright. And then I sat next to him across the table from him for 2 weeks at the Synod. Just a very kind person, very straightforward, very modest, very reserved. And I have to say, I was emailing him just a few weeks ago about something. And, you know, I said, "Would you like my opinion on something?" And he wrote back and said, "Sure, I'll take your 2 cents on something." So it's just, I'm sort of speechless. And I really love the name of Leo. As you were saying, David, calling us back to the tradition of Catholic social teaching. Every Catholic scholar and student of Catholic history will know who Leo XIII is. And so he's, in a sense, I would think, he's aligning himself with that great tradition of Catholic social teaching.
And for our viewers around the world, and in particular watching us back home in the United States, what would you want them to know about Pope Leo XIV? What struck you as far as his temperament and his ability to lead the Catholic Church going forward?
Very down to earth, very plain spoken, very straightforward, very kind, very, very, very approachable. I never felt like I was in the presence of some prince of the church. He's a very modest man. And, you know, I have to say once again, we are, as you know, we are sitting on the rooftop of the Augustinian order that he was prior general of, which is quite something. When you are chosen as the prior general or the master general or the superior general of a whole religious order, that means that everyone in the religious order values you. And it's not only a position of administrative need, but also great spiritual depth. So this is a really qualified person, and I think all Catholics who are listening should feel happy and comfortable and grateful for this tremendous choice.
And how big of a moment is this for the United States, for Catholics back home in the U.S. who thought, historically speaking, that this was not going to happen?
I didn't think this was going to happen. As we were saying earlier, people around the world feel that America is a superpower and they don't need to give the papacy to the United States. But again, he has been described as the least American of the Americans. This combination of a great experience in Peru, and by the way, as an aside, if you heard him speak Italian, his Spanish is even better after all those years in Peru, combined with his real respect in the Curia, in the Vatican Curia, and his contact with so many bishops, made him a terrific choice. You know, I have to say, his temperament is just perfect for this job.
Let's just take a moment and listen to the bells ringing here in St. Peter's Square. Let's just listen. an extraordinary sight over St. Peter's Square. You can see there in the shadow as the sun goes down behind the Basilica at this hour, the tens of thousands who have gathered there in the square. We took note last night, 45,000 people were here, even though they knew they would most likely see black smoke, which is what they saw. 24 hours later, even more have gathered here. The faithful, members of the Catholic Church and beyond the church. I spoke with a woman originally from New York City. One of the first things she told me was that I'm not Catholic, but I felt a need to be here. That she was hoping that the ability of Pope Francis to reach out and touch people would continue with whoever they would choose next. And we have witnessed history made here today by the Roman Catholic Church in selecting the first Pope from the United States. He will go by Pope Leo XIV. Obviously a long line of Leos who served as Pope. But the name itself signifies, in many ways, the efforts by the Church to stand up for social justice, to stand up for workers, for laborers all over the world. And Lindsay, when you talk about global reach that many had hoped would continue after Francis, I was struck that you heard Pope Leo XIV talk about Peru and his time in Peru during his blessing there in the square.
And as you mentioned, he talked about building bridges. And as we've discussed before, pontiff in Latin actually means bridge. It was less than 3 weeks ago on Easter Sunday when we had another huge crowd in this square, the final time that we saw Pope Francis. And one thing that we've been banding about and trying to figure out, read tea leaves all along, is this going to be a candidate of change? I was talking with a Vatican insider over a text just now, and she said of his speech, this sounds very much like Francis. So while he is said to be more middle of the road, more reserved, a little more discreet, it seems that by and large, this is a bit of a continuation, not the about face, not the referendum that many perhaps hope for or expected.
Lindsay Davis here with us, witnessing history at the Vatican as well. Again, the first Pope named from the United States. Terry Moran, I know you're from Chicago. This has to be an extraordinary moment for the Windy City, and in learning that the man who was born in Chicago back in 1955, now 69 years old, which, Terry, you and I were talking, is very young for a newly elected Pope, certainly in these times, and what a day for the city of Chicago.
What a great day for the city of Chicago. Yeah, I was born in Chicago. It is thrilling. And a couple of things. Pope Leo XIV was born on the south side of Chicago. If Lindsay's reporting is true, and I trust it is, he is a Cubs fan on the south side. That tells you one thing, he's tough, because it is not easy to be a Cubs fan on the south side of Chicago. But seriously, he brings, you know, that very Chicago openness to labor. I think that the fact that he chose the name Leo after that Leo XIII and that ringing declaration in his encyclical of the essential dignity of work and of every worker, their right to form unions, the responsibilities of management, that indicates an attitude very common in Chicago, which is a big union city, and an attitude towards workers around the world who have, over the past several decades, really been shortchanged as the globalization of the economies of the world has taken place, and the financialization of the world has essentially concentrated so much wealth. That may be part of his agenda. We may be seeing something there. But there's one other issue from Chicago that I'm curious about to hear from our new Pope, which is, does he prefer deep dish pizza or Roman pizza, which is very, very different?
I would say he might have to say he prefers the pizza right here in Rome, Terry, depending on who's within earshot of him. That's a dangerous question. I'll let you ask that of the new Pope if you get the chance. But Terry, something you said struck me, that he was a Cubs fan from the south side of Chicago, and yet you hear him at the Vatican described for his quiet, humble way. That's perhaps how he survived being a Cubs fan from the south side.
That's a great point, David. And another thing that you know, because he's a Cubs fan, is he is well acquainted with suffering in the sporting world. The Cubs didn't win a World Series for 108 years. Any team can have a bad century, and he knows that, and hope springs eternal. They're a contender this year, it looks like, and so maybe this is an auspicious sign for his ball club. and mine.
Terry Moran, who has covered the Catholic Church for so long and is a native son from Chicago and knows what this moment is like for the Windy City. Terry, thank you. I want to go down to St. Peter's Square. Our chief foreign correspondent, James Longman, who has been with us on the square since the death of Pope Francis. He's been here ever since. And what an extraordinary piece of history we all witnessed unfold here on the balcony at St. Peter's. And James, what's the reaction been down there?
Well, just shock, I think, David. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, just amazing. This 2,000-year-old institution can still surprise us, and boy, did they surprise us. I mean, it's just, I mean, did you hear that? I mean, people are going absolutely wild here. People did not expect this, and it's a challenge. Maybe this is a challenge to the world to say, look, the United States, normally associated with secularism, with materialism, with consumerism. Maybe they feel, these cardinals, that, you know, the church in Africa, the church in Asia, maybe it's okay. Maybe the church is growing in those places. And maybe this is the challenge to the West to take up the faith. They need a communicator. They need someone to go out into the world. That was what we heard very strongly from the bulletin from the cardinals at that last congregation when they said they wanted a pontifex, a bridge builder. And we heard it in the words that he spoke on that balcony. And, you know, maybe on some level, David, there's a feeling that the United States is retreating from the world, from leadership in the world. Perhaps, of course, at the moment, the United States is reforming the world, changing the world to a great degree, but maybe the leadership that the world needs now from this American is right here in Vatican City. That might have been what was going through the minds of these cardinals. We don't know, but down here on the square, it is just a joyful, joyful atmosphere. We've got children on the shoulders of their parents. You can see there the American flag. This is unbelievable. There were audible gasps when we heard that an American had been chosen to be Pope Leo XIV. David.
James Longman down in St. Peter's Square, and James is right that Pope Leo XIV will have a very an amplified voice on the global stage, not only because he's the Pope, and certainly that is a powerful role in and of itself, one beyond comprehension in many ways when you think about the decision these cardinals made here in the last 24 hours, but also because he does come from the United States and he makes history in doing so. The Catholic Church had long shied away from naming a pope who was from the U.S. They have done that. As James said, they have surprised us along the way, and they have done so again today. How he uses that voice and how he balances the other voices on the world stage, that will be what we train our eyes on in the months and years to come. And Father Martin, it's not lost on you that the moment the world recognizes where he's from, the diplomatic role he played here in the church, the outsized role that he played in choosing the bishops, helping Pope Francis to choose the bishops, that this is a man ready to lead, and how will he use his voice? That remains the question.
Well, I think that's a very good question. I see that a number of people have described him as reserved, which is true. He's a very modest, soft-spoken person, and I think, but with a great deal of authority. And you know how he uses his reserved voice on the world stage is important. One of the important things I think historically is that you're talking about the first American Pope. It's not just sort of a novelty for Americans, but it really marks the maturity of the U.S. Church. You know, there was a controversy called Americanism, which people who have read church history know about, were just the whole idea of American democracy and those kinds of things were really suspect by the Vatican. And so this is a kind of the sort of maturing of the church and a recognition that the American church is now fully part of the Catholic Church. It's really quite stunning.
And a test now of some of these competing values moving forward. It's going to be fascinating to watch unfold. I want to go down to the square. Maggie Rulli, also in St. Peter's Square. And Maggie, I know that you were reporting in that you witnessed so many people who were deeply moved and emotional as he emerged on that balcony.
Yeah, David, so many people overwhelmed by emotion come to tears. And I'm here with Jessica Wood from New York, and you were one of them. You were standing right here when we saw that white smoke, and you were overcome.
Yeah, it took me a minute to realize it was even white. We had a tour through the Vatican today, which I thought was totally going to be canceled, and to my surprise, it wasn't. And I was fully ready for the smoke to be black, and it took me a second for it to register, and I immediately just started crying. Like, it's so unbelievable that I'm here right now. I'm here for one day only, and I have the opportunity to be something that's part of world history.
You're here for history, not just a new pope, but the first pope from America. What does that mean for you?
It's definitely profound. First American pope ever, right? And it's no secret it's been a tumultuous time with all of our politics, and I'm hopeful that this is going to be something that's really positive for us as Americans.
Thank you so much. It's been incredible to be down here and feel this emotion, David. I think so many of us are just overcome right now.
So interesting to hear her describe not only the fact that she was here just for one day, and it happened to be the day that the Catholic Church announced the new pope. That's good planning, whether it was meant or not. But that she also put words to the deep political divisions, not only back in the United States, but around the world. And she remains hopeful, that young American woman, hopeful that Pope Leo XIV can offer another voice and help bring people together. And that can only be the hope of all of us moving forward. I want to bring in Father John Walk, who's also with us for our coverage here today. Father Walk, you helped us get to that balcony down the Hall of Blessings in describing what it must be like in preparation to greet the world. And I had asked you beforehand whether or not the timing of these votes, of 4 ballots, we learned of a new pope with the same amount of timing, essentially, that it took for Pope Benedict and then Pope Francis. And we learned today that they made history in choosing the first pope from the United States. How surprising was that to you, and what do you make of the decision?
I thought it was absolutely astounding. It's a massive surprise, and it's a historical turning point, really, for the United States and for the Church. I mean, to think you have a pope now who is, I think of it in certain terms as a linguistic event, and that we have a man who is equally at home in Spanish and in English. People who are near me here, when Leo XIV began speaking in Spanish from the balcony, started crying when they heard him speaking perfect Spanish. And what we're going to face now is something we've never faced before, which is Roman Catholicism, the papacy, speaking to us with an American accent. And that is a new phenomenon.
And Father Walk, you heard him actually reference Peru in his blessing before the square. Certainly he has origins back in the United States, born in Chicago, as we've mentioned, back in '55. He's relatively young, 69 years old. But to make a point of talking about Peru, the time he spent there, missionary work, and as you point out, the fluent Spanish that he spoke. In many ways, those are signals that in moving forward, he is going to continue outreach in the way Pope Francis did over the course of many years.
I think he made reference to bridge building, and he is going to be a bridge between Latin America and what I would call the international Anglosphere. It's not just the United States. It's all of the English speakers all over the world, which are in Africa and Asia. Right? And they're going to hear the Pope in English, which is never a native English. And that's never happened before in the history of the Church.
The Church surprising us again this time after the conclave to replace Pope Francis, Pope Leo XIV. Our thanks to Father Walk. I want to bring in Liz Nagy from WLS, of course, our ABC station in Chicago. She's here in Rome with our team. And Liz, first of all, reaction on the streets here in Rome, and I'm sure you're already read in on the reaction back home in Chicago. What a day.
David, I can almost feel the vibration of Catholics in Chicago celebrating this moment right now. People who live in Chicago must be extremely proud of Pope Leo XIV. That conversation that you and David just had, or you and Terry had just a few minutes ago about Pope Leo XIV being a Cubs fan on the south side of Chicago, whether or not he prefers Roman or deep dish pizza, those are the kinds of conversations that are surely happening in the city of Chicago right now. But it's also a very diverse Catholic community, 2.1 million Catholics in the Chicago area, many of whom speak Spanish and English. That will be something that really means something to them. A pope coming out on the balcony, the first American pope addressing the world in Spanish. Now, Pope Leo has spent much of his career outside of the United States, but has frequently returned home to Chicago. Most recently, he was there in 1998 through 2014, when he was then sent to Peru. So this will be a very unifying thing for Catholics in Chicago, something they'll very much look forward to seeing how his papacy goes. David?
Liz and the team at WLS, thanks so much for giving us that perspective, and we're sure the hometown is extraordinarily moved by the history made by the Catholic Church and the belief these cardinals, the 132 other cardinals who were gathered in that chapel, the belief they had in Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost from the United States, who is now Pope Leo XIV, choosing the name Leo. There have been several Pope Leos before, but Leo and the significance of that choice, standing up for social justice around the world, and to stand up for workers, laborers around the world. He said we must reach out to those in need. He said God loves everyone. A stunningly magnificent day here at St. Peter's Square. You can see the sun setting behind St. Peter's Basilica. The entire team will be here later today for a special edition of World News Tonight. Again, an historic choice by the Catholic Church, Pope Leo XIV, born from Chicago and the United States, spending time all over the world, and here at the Catholic Church in Rome, he'll serve as the next Pope. I'm David Muir. From all of us here at ABC News, thank you for being with us. I'll see you for World News Tonight.